There's a truck parked on a snow-covered road in the middle of a forest, smoke rising from a chimney stack, warm amber light glowing through a single window, and a man standing beside it in a blizzard who is warmer, freer, and financially better positioned than almost anyone paying rent or a mortgage in America right now. And the most disruptive part of what you're looking at is not the truck. It is what is sitting in the bed of that truck. Because what that man built for $650 is quietly exposing something about property ownership in this country that most people are not supposed to figure out until it is too late. Stay with that image for a moment, because by the time this video is finished, you're going to understand exactly why some of the most financially intelligent men in America are building these right now. What property tax actually costs you over a lifetime, how a 2,000-pound structure on wheels changes your legal relationship with the land beneath you, and why this particular bill might be the most rational response to the American housing situation that anyone has produced in the last 50 years. That is not an exaggeration. It is an argument, and I am going to make it carefully. But first, let me tell you what you are actually looking at in that image, because the thumbnail does not capture the full picture. That is a mini Quonset cabin built directly onto a heavy-duty truck bed. The arched corrugated shell sits on a wooden platform frame that was engineered to bolt onto the bed rails of a standard 3/4-ton pickup. The stovepipe you see rising from a roofline is connected to a small wood-burning stove inside, which means this man is generating heat from what he gathered for free in a vehicle that can move to a different location whenever he decides to. The window is double-glazed, the walls are insulated, and the interior temperature on the night this photo was taken was sitting at 68 degrees, while the outside temperature was 11 degrees. And he paid $650 to build the entire living structure you are looking at. Now here's the question that changes everything about this conversation. If a structure is mounted on a vehicle, is it real property? In almost every jurisdiction in the United States, the answer is no. Real property is land, and anything permanently affixed to land. The moment a structure rolls, the moment it has wheels, the moment it is legally a vehicle rather than a building, it exits the real property classification system entirely. It becomes personal property. And personal property, in most American counties, is either not taxed at all or taxed at a rate so nominal that it is barely worth calculating. What this means in practical terms is that a man living in a structure mounted on a truck is not subject to annual property tax on his home. He may pay a vehicle registration fee once a year. That fee, in most states, runs between $100 and $300. That is his total annual tax obligation on his dwelling. Compare that to the national median property tax payment, which runs over $2,400 per year, and you begin to understand why this is not just a quirky DIY project. This is a legal arbitrage play on the American tax code that anyone with a truck and $650 can execute right now. But I need you to understand something before we go any further, because the property tax number alone actually undersells the argument. The real number is what property tax costs over the length of a life. If you own a median-valued home and pay the national median property tax rate, you will pay approximately $2,400 per year in property taxes. Over 30 years, that is $72,000. And that calculation does not include the annual increases most jurisdictions impose as assessed values climb, factor in realistic value appreciation, and the compounding tax increases that follow it, and the lifetime property tax bill on a median home over a 30-year period approaches or exceeds $100,000 in the majority of American states. That is $100,000 you paid for privilege of owning land that you never truly own, because the moment you stop paying property tax, the government has the legal mechanism to seize what you believed was yours. Property tax is, functionally, a perpetual rent payment to the government. You pay it forever or you lose everything. A man living in a mini Quonset on a truck does not participate in that system. He pays his vehicle registration once a year and drives away. Now here is where things get genuinely interesting, and this is the section of the conversation that most people who discuss mobile living never reach. The man who built this specific structure started with a used Toyota pickup that he already owned. His starting point was not a land purchase, not a zoning application, not an architect's fee, not a foundation permit. His starting point was a pile of corrugated steel panels, a load of lumber, a wood stove he found at a farm auction, and a weekend with a drill. He did not need a contractor. He did not need a building inspector. He did not need approval from a single government official to create the home you are looking at in that image. He needed materials, time, and a willingness to do the work himself. The material list breaks down simply: corrugated galvanized steel panels for the arch shell, dimensional lumber for the platform frame and the interior wall framing, rigid foam insulation board cut to fit between the steel ribs, a reflective vapor barrier bonded to the interior insulation face, a small cast iron wood stove with a through-roof stovepipe kit, one double-glazed window, fasteners, sealant, and a tube of high-temperature caulk around the stovepipe collar. That is a complete list. Every item was sourced at cost. Nothing came from a specialty vendor. Nothing required professional installation. Total material spend, including the stove, came to $650. The build itself took 1 man 2 weekends working alone. The most technically demanding step was cutting the corrugated panels to follow the arch geometry, which sounds complicated and is not. You mark the curve with a flexible piece of conduit bent to shape, you cut along the line with a metal cutting blade, and you fasten the panel to the frame. That process repeats until the shell is complete. Everything else, framing, insulation, window insulation, stove placement, is either simpler than that or equivalent. What he ended up with is a structure that maintains interior warmth in conditions that would make a tent uninhabitable, that travels on a standard highway at normal road speeds, that can be parked on any piece of private land without triggering a building permit, and that owes nothing to any county assessor's office in America. Now let's talk about what the inside is actually like, because this is the part that separates this concept from a glorified camping setup, and the distinction matters more than most people initially understand. The interior of a mini Quonset truck cabin is not organized the way a standard room is organized. There are no perpendicular walls, no flat ceiling, no wasted corner space filled with furniture that does not quite fit. The arch overhead is continuous, and that continuity changes the way space feels at a neurological level. Men who spend time inside these structures consistently report that the space registers as larger than it measures. The explanation is simple. Human beings assess the size of a space by its volume, not its floor area. A curved arch over a compact footprint generates significantly more cubic footage than a rectangular room of identical square footage, and your nervous system knows the difference even when a tape measure cannot show it. The wood stove positioned at the forward end of the structure is not an aesthetic choice. It is a deliberate thermal engineering decision. Heat rises and moves toward the rear of the cabin through natural convection, which means the sleeping area at the back of the truck bed receives a steady, passive flow of warm air without any mechanical distribution system. No fan, no ductwork, no electricity required to stay warm. The stove burns small diameter wood that a man can gather from any forest floor in 30 minutes, which means the fuel source for this heating system is available free of charge across most of the American continent. The single window is positioned to allow morning light into the sleeping area and provide a sight line to the exterior without compromising the structural integrity of the arch shell. This sounds like a minor detail until you spend a morning inside one of these cabins and realize that the quality of the light at that angle, combined with the enclosed warmth and the silence of the surrounding forest, produces a sleep environment that most men describe with the same word: deep, not comfortable in the hotel room sense of the word. Deep in the biological sense. The kind of sleep the human body was designed to get and rarely does in a conventional dwelling surrounded by noise, light pollution, and the low-frequency hum of electrical systems. The logistics of living in a mobile cabin require a different kind of thinking than the logistics of living in a fixed home, and that different thinking turns out to produce a man who is more resourceful, more attentive to his actual needs, and significantly clearer about the distinction between what he requires and what he has simply been accustomed to spending money on. Water comes from a collapsible tank that holds enough for cooking, drinking, and basic hygiene between refills. Refilling happens at any campground water station, most of which charge nothing for service, or at a rural gas station, or at the home of a friend or family member. The water supply question, which most people raise on municipal infrastructure instinctively frame as a problem, resolves into a management task that takes roughly 10 minutes once every 3 to 5 days. Food is cooked on a small surface mounted beside the stove, using the same heat source that warms the space. One fuel source handles two functions simultaneously. Cooking in this environment tends toward simplicity, not because simplicity is forced on the occupant, but because simplicity turns out to be what he actually wanted when the complexity of maintaining a full kitchen was no longer available to distract him from the question of what he actually likes to eat. Power comes from a 160-watt folding solar panel that charges a single lithium battery during daylight hours. That battery runs LED lighting through the evening, charges phones and devices, and powers a small radio or speakers if the occupant wants sound. It does not run a television, a gaming system, or any appliance that exists primarily to fill time. The reduction in passive entertainment consumption that this power budget imposes turns out to be one of the most consistently reported positive outcomes among men who adopt this lifestyle. The hours previously absorbed by screens get redirected into reading, building, observing the surrounding environment, and thinking, and most men report that the exchange feels overwhelmingly favorable within the first 2 weeks. The legal picture for a build like this requires honest attention because it is the area where the most questions arise and where the answers vary most significantly by location. Vehicle registration is the first layer. A structure built into or onto a vehicle is regulated as a vehicle in most American states, which means it needs to meet basic road safety standards for lighting, reflectors, and weight distribution. None of those requirements are onerous, and all of them are achievable within the $650 budget if the builder accounts for them from the beginning. Parking and overnight habitation laws vary significantly by municipality. Urban areas typically have ordinances restricting overnight habitation of vehicles on public streets. Rural areas almost universally do not. If the plan involves parking on private land, which is a context shown in the thumbnail image, those restrictions generally do not apply at all. A man parked in his own driveway, or in the driveway of a willing family member or friend, or on privately owned rural land, is not typically subject to any overnight habitation ordinance regardless of the jurisdiction. National Forest and Bureau of Land Management land in the American West allow dispersed camping for up to 14 days in most areas, which means a man in a truck cabin can legally occupy millions of acres of public land across the country for free, rotating locations on a 2-week schedule without ever paying a campsite fee, a lot rent, or a property tax. The combination of those legal realities means that a man with a mini Quonset truck cabin has access to shelter that is warm, mobile, privately owned, legally parked, and subject to zero property tax on most of the continent. The annual cost of maintaining that shelter is the cost of wood for heat, registration for the vehicle, and whatever he chooses to spend on food and incidentals. No mortgage, no rent, no property tax, no homeowners association, no landlord, no utility bills beyond what a solar panel and a wood stove cannot cover. If that sounds extreme, consider what the conventional alternative is actually costing the average American man right now. Median rent in the United States now exceeds $1,500 per month in most urban markets. Over 10 years, that is $180,000 paid to a landlord with nothing to show for it at the end. A mortgage on a median-priced home at current interest rates costs the borrower more than double the purchase price over the life of the loan when total interest is counted. Property taxes, insurance, maintenance, and HOA fees on that same home add another several $100,000 to the true lifetime cost of conventional ownership. The man in the truck cabin in the blizzard is not living primitively. He is living cheaply against a baseline that has become so expensive that most Americans cannot afford it without spending the majority of their working hours simply maintaining access to a place to sleep. That is the actual argument this truck is making while it sits parked in the snow. It is not an argument against comfort. It is an argument against the assumption that the conventional path to shelter is the only rational path. Because when you look at the full lifetime cost of that conventional path, and you compare it to the cost of $650 in materials and a vehicle registration fee, the conventional path stops looking rational at all. If this conversation is the kind of thinking you came to this channel for, subscribe right now, because we build this content specifically for men who are willing to question the financial assumptions they were handed rather than simply execute them. The next video we are releasing covers 5 actual legal strategies that men are using right now to live on land without paying a single dollar in property tax. And this truck cabin is only the beginning of that entire conversation. Do not miss it.